All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to write and solve proportions in order to calculate the amount of tip that should be left or was left at a particular restaurant based on the bill. Okay, so that's our first step. So here we go. Before we do that, we need to do some rounding. So let's just review our place values. 5 is in the thousands place. 7 is in the hundreds place. 3 is in the tens place. 4 is in the ones place. The decimal point, and then after that, our place values end in THS. So we have the tenths, the hundredths, and the thousandths. Okay? So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be dealing with money because we're talking about tip. So that means everything needs to be in terms of dollars and cents. So as we look at this, we're going to be rounding to the nearest hundredth. When we round to the nearest hundredth, we look at the thousandths place. Okay, so I left a space for you on your paper to write in the place values if you needed that to refresh your memory. It's probably good to have it on your paper just so you can look. And also remember, we talked about when we're rounding, when you look at that thousandths place, so if we're rounding to the nearest hundredths, we're going to look at the thousandths place. 5 and above, you give it a shove. So if we were rounding this to the hundredths, the thousandths place has a 2. So 5 and above, you give it a shove. 4 and below, you let it go. So you're going to let this go. So that would be 0.91. Okay? When we're dealing with money, we're always rounding to 2 decimal places. So when we're rounding to 2 decimal places, that's the same as saying we're rounding to the nearest hundredth, which is the math way to say it. So here's our first example. We want to round 9 and 234 thousandths to 2 decimal places, which means we're taking a look at that third decimal place, which is the thousandths place, and we're looking at that 4. That 4, when I look at it on my number line, is below 5. 4 and below, you let it go. So we've got 9.23. So that would be $9.23. Next one. What if we wanted to round 143 and 567 thousandths to the nearest hundredth? Well, again, nearest hundredth is 2 decimal places. So we're going to look at the third decimal place, which is the thousandths. It's a 7. When I compare 7 to 5, 7 is greater than 5. So 5 and above, give it a shove. So instead of staying at 5.6, it's going to become 5.7. So we'd have $143.57. If we're going to round 18.781 or 18 and 781 thousandths to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 decimal places, what we're going to do is we're going to look at that third decimal place, which is the thousandths. In this case, we have a 1. We look at where 1 falls. 5 and above, you give it a shove. 4 and below, you let it go. 1 is part of the 4 and below, so we let it go. $18.78. And one final one. If we're rounding 98 and 395 thousandths to the nearest hundredth, or to 2 decimal places, which is to the nearest hundredth, we're going to look at that 5. We see that 5. That's 5 and above, we give it a shove, which means this 9 is going to get bumped up to be a 10. Yeah, folks, it's going to get bumped up to be a 10. So that means there's a 0 here, and a 1 gets carried. So now we have 1 plus 3, which gives us 4. So our decimal, actually, because we rounded to the nearest hundredth, actually changed the number in the tenths place because that 9 was so high. So our actual answer is $98.40, or 98 and 40 hundredths. Since we're talking about money, we're going to keep the 2 decimal places, even though there's a 0 there as a placeholder. So let's do some stuff with money. You go to a restaurant with some of your friends, your bill's $25, you leave a $5 tip. Write a ratio that compares the amount of money left for the tip to the total amount of the bill. So first off, just want to say to y'all that when you go to a restaurant and somebody is bringing your food to you, you should be leaving a tip, okay? Servers don't get paid minimum wage. They get what's called a server's wage, which is less than minimum wage because they're expecting tips. So make sure that you're tipping. That's just a personal thing. So it says to write a ratio that compares the amount of money left for the tip to the total amount on the bill. Well, we need to identify, first off, what is the amount of money left for the tip. So what did you leave for the tip? Well, we left $5 for the tip. Okay. All right, so then what did you leave for the amount of the bill? Well, the amount of the bill was $25. So when we write our ratio, we have 5 out of 25. That'll reduce, right? We can reduce fractions. We did that yesterday. 5/25, 5 divided by 25. Math, enter, enter. And you're going to get 1/5. Okay? Now we're going to use our ratio to calculate the percent of the tip left. Well, yesterday we converted fractions to decimals and decimals to percents. So to do that, we're going to use the ratio, which was 5 divided by 25 equals 0.2. And remember, when we turn a decimal to a percent, we draw our hiney. So we draw our little cheeks, add the 0 in for a placeholder, and that tells us that we have a 20% tip. Okay, what about example 2? What percent tip was left if the bill was $12 and you left $2.16? Well, we can write our ratio, right? So we had $2.16 out of 12, and we're looking for the percent. Well, I know percent's out of 100, so I could set up a proportion, right? Because a decimal, that's just craziness. So when we cross multiply, we have 12p equals 2 times, or 2.16 times 100. Notice I put these little lines here like Cameron showed us, because I know I'm going to multiply those together. So 2.16 times 100 is 216. So 12p is 216. And then we divide by 12. And when you divide by 12, you get, drum roll, 18, which means that the percent of tip left was 18%. Now, what I'm going to give you is a formula you can write down and remember and use every time you have to calculate the percent or you calculate what the tip should be, or hey, if this is the tip, what was the total bill? You can find all of that information out. Okay, so here we go. Our total cost and tip formula. It's going to be a proportion. The tip goes on the top. Tip top. The total is our denominator. Tip is the numerator. Total is the denominator. And this is always going to equal a percent. So that's the percent. And percent is always based on 100. So we're going to use this formula every time. Okay? So here we go. Alice works as a server. On a $50 bill, she received an $8 tip. What percent tip did Alice receive? Well, here's our formula. What was her tip? Good, $8. What was the total? Right, $50. What percent did she receive? So we're looking for the percent. So that's our X. And we cross multiply. So 50 times X is 50X equals 8 times 100. And then we'd use the strategy that Cameron taught us. Multiply 8 times 100, which is 800. So 50X equals 800. And divide by 50. So that means that X was 16. So Alice received a 16% tip. So Alice received a 16% tip there. I know a second ago it said 18. I had to fix that. Okay, your turn. Pause the video. Check out Micaiah's. Figure out what her tip was. So hopefully you got that Micaiah received a 15% tip. Okay, Venetian Palace is one of the restaurants that I know charges a set tip. I believe it's 20% tip on all of its tickets. Lots of times if you go out to eat at a restaurant, if you have a group larger than 6, they'll charge a gratuity. That's what they call it at the restaurant. And they'll say that the gratuity will be added to the total bill for groups larger than whatever. Because sometimes the servers work really hard and they don't get a tip. So, but Venetian Palace charges 20% tip on all of the tickets. So every bill they have, they're guaranteeing their server 20% tip, which is great, except sometimes people tip more than 20%. And if the tip is being calculated, then the person's not likely to get extra. All right, but we want to figure out what would our tip have to be if they place a 20% tip on all of its tickets. So what we're doing is we're using our same formula. We have our tip divided by our total equals the percent out of 100. Do we know our tip? No, we don't know our tip, so that's X. How much was the bill? Well, the bill was $39. What's the tip going to be? Tip's going to be 20%, so that's 20 out of 100. And we cross multiply. So we have 39 times 20 equals 100 times X. And we use our Cameron strategy, 39 times 20. Okay, so we have 100X equals 780. Divide by 100, and X is $7.80. So when we did the math over here, it was just 7.8, but when we answer the question, it's in dollars and cents, so it'd be $7.80. So you want to make sure you answer the question that's being asked in terms of dollars and cents. Okay, now you take a shot. This time we're at Venetian Palace, and the bill is $55. So what would the tip be? So hopefully you got that there would be an $11 tip on a $55 bill. Now there's some practice questions on the back of this sheet. So your teacher's going to tell you what you need to do on those and how many you need to do. So take a look, listen to what your instructor's telling you. Maybe they're going to want you to do a couple at a time. Maybe they're going to want you to try them all. Maybe they only want you to do every other one. Just listen to whatever your teacher's asking of you. Okay? Have a great day.